Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Coffin Dodgers. It is not, in fact, an obscure brand of British biscuit. Although I somewhat wish that it was, because it's a kart racing game. A genre that I think a lot of us that had lived through the era of kart racing everything wish had died a horrible, painful death. Maybe you didn't live through that particular era, but there was a running joke at the time when ever a game in a franchise released a new title, it would be stated that that franchise was progressively moving towards the inevitable kart racing spin-off. You want a few examples? Try this on for size. Star Wars Super Bombad Racing. Bear in mind there was already a Star Wars racing game that was actually pretty good called Pod Racer, but no, we're going to make a kart racing game out of that for some reason. But that's maybe the least egregious example. What about Ants Racing? Yes, that was on the Game Boy Color, if I recall correctly. Yeah, you know that film Ants, the animated film about the insects? Yeah, there was a kart racing game. Angry Birds Go, kart racing game. Bomberman Kart. Well, of course there was. Digimon Racing. NASCAR Kart Racing. NASCAR Kart Racing? You've already got cars. Why would you turn them into karts? What's the point in that? M&M's Kart Racing was one giant game of product placement. Looney Tunes Racing. Rayman Kart, for some reason. Pac-Man World Rally, because, I mean, what's the obvious conclusion when dealing with Pac-Man? Yes, stick him in a car and send him around the world. South Park Rally, good lord. The list goes on and on and on. There was even a WWF kart racing game. Just, oh, God. And along comes Coffin Dodgers, which was an early access title, is now fully out, and it's about racing scooters against the Grim Reaper. The idea is you're an old person, and you will die if you lose too many races. It's a bit morbid, isn't it? And you'll be resurrected as a zombie, which will continue to race till the end of time. So you have to race against the Grim Reaper and other people in your old people's home, condemning them to death. Just slightly grim. Alright, options menu, shall we? Let's have a look at that. Not a terrible options menu, actually. It's not really lacking too much. You've even got AA up to 8, and trust me, with the visuals of this game, you're gonna bloody need it. You've got full screen on or off, although I found that when I tried windowed mode, the game froze my PC to the point where I had to Control-Alt-Delete and quit it that way. It took me about 2 minutes to get out of the game. Not sure what the hell was going on there, but I had some issues with Alt-tabbing as well. VSync on or off. There's your AA, separate music and sound effect sliders. You probably want to turn music down to 0 after a while. Trust me, it's highly repetitive. Motion blur, turn that off because it makes the game look awful. Well, more awful. Ambient occlusion and physics quality high. I can't imagine what low looks like. If I'm being critical, you'll see why in a minute. Then you have your controls right here. Menu controls. You can even actually redefine the controls for the menu screen, which is a little unusual, and game controls. Now, what's going to be a little bit odd for a lot of you, and I assume this is probably just an issue with my PC because this does have an Xbox 360 controller layout, is that while my controller worked in the game menu, it did not work at all in the actual game itself. So I couldn't use my controller. I don't know why that is. Not a clue. Because this game does support X input, so it seems like it's just a weird bug or maybe a problem on my end. And no one else seems to be reporting it, so I assume it's just an issue on my end. Alright. So, game modes. You got multiplayer. Nothing to see here. There's barely anybody playing this game. It actually had a decent-sized community. It peaked at like, well, I say decent, relatively speaking. It peaked at about 300 concurrent players in the early access. It now has about 12. So, good luck ever finding a multiplayer game for this. Single-player story mode. Story, I use the term loosely. Quick race, time trial, and open world. Open world is a complete waste of time. You drive around tracks, getting collectibles, and that's really about it. The crazy granddad mode essentially involves finding an object, racing to the next object, and so on and so forth. And then time trial and quick race. Quick race does offer you one of the 13 tracks available, which is a decent number, I've got to admit. Well, story mode is the main meat of the game. This is where you're battling against the Grim Reaper in an effort not to be murdered by said Grim Reaper. Is it murder if it's the Grim Reaper? I don't know. I mean, it seems like it's just his everyday job, isn't it? You can't really blame him, you know? It's like blaming a dog for being hungry and then grabbing on the carpet. Alright. So, you have your scooter, your motorized scooter, which can be upgraded. And you can put things like racing stripes and flames on it, all manner of things like that if you so desire. And you can also change the paint job of the thing, so we can make it black. There we go. I want to paint it black. And you've got some basic upgrades. So you can upgrade your weapon to increase the impact and range of it. And you can also do things like upgrade your engine and so on and so forth. So, pretty basic upgrade system, nothing really out of the ordinary. The one thing that I did like is the ability to upgrade the number of items that you can get, and you can also upgrade the ability to switch between items. So, by default, you can hold one item. Once you upgrade it, you can hold two, but I believe you have to use whatever it was that you picked up last. And eventually you can switch between them, so it gives you a little bit more flexibility. Alright, let's jump into the game and show you Coffin Dodgers then, shall we? I still wish they were a biscuit. I really, really do. Alright, so welcome to the wonderful world of Coffin Dodgers. This is my character. As far as I know, all the characters are pretty much identical outside of the aesthetic. And off we go. It is kart racing on motorized scooters. I cannot imagine how the gaming world survived without it. Even with motion blur turned off, it still looks like the cars are being affected by motion blur in the distance, which is really, really odd. Now, the first thing you might notice is even with 8 times AA on, this is not a great-looking game at all. I'm sorry, it's not. Now, I can respect certain aesthetic choices, absolutely. Deliberate aesthetic decisions. But it's not the aesthetic decision that I have a problem with. I don't mind the sort of twisted, cartoony world, that's fine. I do mind when there's not a lot of detail there, when it's got poor texture quality, and indeed, it's just lacking in color. That's what really surprises me about it. It seems like they could very easily have made this game nice and colorful and bright, and it's all pastel shades. I have to wonder if that is a deliberate decision to emphasize the fact that you're racing with old people, but one way or the other, I think this could certainly look a great deal brighter and more exciting than it currently does, even if the texture work and the animation quality is poor. And that's the next thing that I would criticize about it. Things like particle effects, animation quality, they're all pretty damn ancient, frankly. And this game does not look like it came out in 2015 at all. It looks minimum 5 years old, and that's being generous here. And there are certainly much, much better looking indie games, so that's not an excuse as far as I'm concerned. Now, I can of course overlook all of that if it happens to be an enjoyable kart racing game. But up to this point, it certainly has not been. There's a great example of the animation quality. That's physics on high, by the way, as you notice his arms clipping through the road. Indeed, on the on-scooter animations, a lot of his body parts actually clip through the scooter, even in victory animations. There's nice little bits of detail here and there. For instance, if I go too fast, you can notice that my sunglasses actually fly back on my head and he has to correct them. That's a nice little bit of character there, but this could be a hell of a lot better. And especially if you're going to have a slider for physics quality. Like I said, if that's your best quality physics, then I don't know what the hell's going on there. And unfortunately, it looks like we are most likely going to die, because that was an absolutely terrible effort there. Disgraceful, disgraceful. Alright, I'm going to have to win the next race, otherwise I will die. That would be terrible. I wonder what happens if... I assume death can't possibly be in last place. That would be quite comedic. I should probably try that one again. It's a fairly short race, so we'll give it another bash anyway. So yeah, aesthetically, I mean, if it actually looked like it did in the splash screens, then I'd be okay with it. Nice, sort of crisp, colorful graphics, but it doesn't look like that at all. You know, that's an artistic representation of an otherwise fairly poor-looking game. But what about the racing aspect of it? Well, it is so bog standard when it comes to kart racing. It's a genre that could be innovated on. It's a genre that was bled dry over the years, there's no doubt about that, but outside of a couple of smaller indie efforts and, of course, Mario Kart, we haven't a great deal of kart racing lately. I suppose you can count things like Mod Nation races. Oh my god. I don't even know how that happened. I suppose you can count things like Mod Nation races on the PlayStation platform as well. But you've got to do something to make me interested in a kart racing game these days. You've got to do something. And it just doesn't. Does it have any unique game mechanics whatsoever? I'd love to say that it does, but it doesn't. It's got really, really bog standard pickups. It doesn't even have a great deal of them either. You know, I'd at least expect a decent number of pickups, perhaps. But it doesn't have that many. And more often than not, you get the same pickup over and over and over again. I mean, I've had instances where I've had 6 pickups in a row that have all been shields. In fact, that seems to happen more often than not. I wonder if there's even an issue with the randomization algorithm or something along those lines. It's inexplicable to me. I'm really not sure why that is. So, not great on the weapons front, honestly. Not a great deal of strategy involved in any of the weapons. I mean, they're really all bog standard. You've got your oil slick, your speed boost, your homing missiles. You've got an Uzi that you could fire in range. I mean, you've pretty much seen all the power-ups in the last 2 minutes of the game, really. Great, I've got a bunch of Uzis again. I want to actually get rid of these because they're really not that useful. I need a speed boost right now. Not that I think that's really going to help all that much. You know, I really, frankly, do not mind if I'm taken by the Reaper at this point. It might be a blessing compared to playing any more of Coffin Dodgers. But what about the handling? How do you do decent kart racer handling? Well, I think if you follow the Mario Kart example, which is the granddaddy of that particular genre, then you've got to have a look at the idea of power sliding. And that's really where you get the arcadey kart racing action from. Really sort of wacky, slidey handling that also has a decent skill ceiling. The problem is that you don't really have much of the power sliding going on here. There isn't actually a power slide button. You can hit the brake and kind of slide a little bit, but the actual handling of the scooters is not particularly great. The game doesn't run all that fast in terms of the feeling of speed. Not that I suppose that you would expect it to if you're riding on a motorized scooter, but I gotta ask you, if you don't have the speed and you don't have the enjoyable arcadey power sliding kart racing handling, and you don't have a good weapon selection, and you don't look all that good, and you don't have a wide variety of game modes, then what do you have exactly? Well, you've got two things. You've got decent track design. Now, I'll give them credit on this. I've actually seen a decent amount of variety. There's a couple of different themes, like there's a village, there is this area right here, which is out in the country, which is being attacked by aliens for God knows what reason. And you'll come across some interesting obstacles. I mean, there's a level where you're going through a tunnel and there are trains that you have to avoid. On these levels, you have to avoid aliens sort of sucking you up, which is reasonable. I mean, I don't hate the track design. I don't think there's anything particularly incredible about it. I mean, obviously, big genre leaders completely crush this game in terms of interesting track design, but that's to be expected. I mean, you can't compare Nintendo to some random indie developer. That's absolutely absurd. But outside of that, you've got this sort of basic melee system that seems like it was lifted wholesale from the old game Street Racers, which is really just a case of you hit the button and you sort of lash out with a melee attack. You can also charge it to knock people off their scooters. But outside of that, I mean, that's it. The music is highly repetitive. As I said before, the selection of pickups is just anemic at best. And they're not even that fun to use. I mean, if it was a selection of just really high-quality pickups that worked really well, it would be great, but it really is bog standard, things like homing missiles and oil sticks and speed boosts and all sorts of things like that. It's really not that enjoyable, and I'm left asking, why does this game exist, and where are the original ideas that would set this game apart from other titles in the genre? And I am left with the obvious conclusion that this game doesn't actually have any. The theme is an interesting one, and the idea that you are racing to make sure that the Grim Reaper doesn't get you is amusing, but really nothing's done with it. I mean, there's bare minimum theme applied to the weapons, for instance. You know, you've got the defibrillator, which is a little AoE stun, which makes sense in the context of old people's home, but everything else is just an Uzi? I mean, why is there an Uzi? It's rockets, for instance. You know, these are just bog standard generic weapons that don't fit with the game's theme in any way. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's just a case of let's tick boxes in what needs to be in a kart racer, rather than taking a strong look at our theme and saying, what fits here? I mean, why do I have a force field of all things? A force field? Old people racing. Yes, we have access to futuristic force fields, Uzis, and a defibrillator. Yeah. It's just a hodgepodge, you know, there's no artistic direction there. There's no cohesion. So what's my conclusion? It's probably pretty negative, isn't it? You know, as I said, I think the only positive thing that I have to say about this game is the track design. I think the track design is all right. It's not terrible, for the most part. But holy hell. Poor handling, lack of game modes, lack of item selection, ancient, archaic-looking graphics, and of course a dead multiplayer scene all contribute to me saying one thing: this game is dead on arrival. It is, I am afraid, dead and buried. I don't wish to come back as a zombie to play any more of Coffin Dodgers, I'm afraid. I'm surprised that this sort of feedback wasn't given to them during the early access period of the game, really. It's just a little bit surprising. I see a bunch of positive reviews for this, and I'm thinking, why? Like, on what grounds, exactly? I really don't know. There are some games that don't take a long time to figure out. This is one of them, and my conclusion is that this game is generic, dull, badly put together, and utterly lacking in any form of inspiration. I'm sorry. That's sad, kind of. Is it? I mean, I like to say that because I like to think I have a lot of sympathy for indie developers because everybody works hard when it comes to making games, but there's only so far that can really take you. Effort doesn't necessarily translate into good results. And did we really need another kart racing game? Not of this quality. No. Ugh. Coffin Dodgers, ladies and gentlemen, available for $10 or your regional equivalent on Steam. I have one foot in the grave after playing that. I'll see you next time.